Everyone, thanks. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here today with you all. And I'd like to talk about the concept of passion at work. So let me start with a few questions for you guys. Who has ever gotten the career advice, you must do what you are passionate about? Okay, I see just about everyone in the audience raising their hands. Who here has ever been warned that doing what you love as work will take the passion out of it? Less hands, some groans, a few people. Okay. Well, I've received both of these pieces of advice from different mentors. In fact, I've received both pieces of advice from the same mentor at different times, and I don't know if he was aware of the dichotomy that he'd presented to me, but I sure was. And what I want to suggest to you today through a slice of my own career experience to date is that the only way to reconcile passion and work is to inject values, and that this confluence of passion, work, and values creates a sort of Venn diagram that can really drive a satisfying career trajectory. So we'll start with passion. I think you just heard a couple stories about me. I couldn't quite hear them from back there, but I'm sure I was properly embarrassed. But I'll just go further with that and say, for example, that in preschool, the teachers pulled my parents aside and said they were concerned with my mental states because I didn't want to play with the other kids. I wanted to go play with Matchbox cars off in the corner by myself. When I was 15, I bought a basket case of an old Ford Mustang and bonded with my stepfather while repairing it, and bonded with tow truck drivers when it broke down again inevitably. And in college, I discovered motorcycles, which is really one of the most intimate and visceral ways to move through your surroundings. And I discovered the beautiful art of motor racing through participation with the Formula SAE Collegiate Racing Program. So I'm a card-carrying car nut. And so when I graduated from college, I said, well, okay, I love cars. I should probably go work in the auto industry. So I did. I went to go work at General Motors in a graduate and training program for marketing and communications. And just as things tend to go in life, it was different than I expected. I had the opportunity to work with some really great people on some really innovative projects at GM, but ultimately I did not see my passion for cars translating into a passion for the industry of cars. So I decided to leave, but before I did, I saw something that would stay with me for a while. Out behind the Warren Technical Center in Michigan, I saw a row of GM EV1 electric vehicles in various states of disassembly. Now, if you've not seen the documentaries Who Killed the Electric Car and Revenge of the Electric Car, I highly recommend you go see them. It will explain this better than I'm going to. But what happened in a nutshell was GM built these really wonderful electric vehicles in the 90s in response to a mandate from California that a certain number of cars needed to be zero emissions. They leased them out to a bunch of people, and then when California repealed that mandate and the leases were up, they took all the cars back and crushed them, much to the dismay of customers who absolutely loved these cars. And seeing those cars getting ready to go to the crusher really kind of sparked an awareness in me that would grow over the years. I started looking around and seeing things like the pollution, the haze hanging over cities like Los Angeles or Shanghai, the soot that you wash off your face after a day in a European city where most of the vehicles are diesels, and global warming. Different studies quote different figures, but most credible organizations agree that the automobile is one of the largest net contributors to climate change. And this is to say nothing of the geopolitics and business practices of oil companies. So I'm looking around, these things are becoming more prominent and obvious, and I'm saying to myself, how can I love this? My passion is contributing to the deterioration of the earth, and it's supporting the sketchy industry so that what? So that I can spend my spare time and money at a racetrack going in circles as fast as I can. Anyway, I leave, I go into management consulting for a while, I go to business school, and I am lucky enough to be able to intern at Google during my MBA, where I was turned on to the world of Silicon Valley, where the pace of innovation and ideas and execution is light speed. And it was a really inspiring work environment, the first time I'd found such a thing. And in the last days of business school, this Venn diagram started to come together for me. Passion, values, work environment. I need to find these three things in one place. But where do I do it? Well, fortunately, the electric vehicle industry was having a renaissance at the time, and still is, I'm happy to say. Companies like Tesla were leading the way out in California. So not long after business school, I packed my bags and I moved to San Francisco, and I started knocking on the doors of a few companies that I thought were doing this right. After a time, I found my way to Mission Motors. And Mission Motors was started by a battery engineer from Tesla that wanted to take their model of making high-end, high-performance electric vehicles, electric cars, and applying it to motorcycles. And when I arrived, they just finished debuting the Mission 1, which was an all-electric superbike that had just run at the Bonneville Salt Flats land speed record runs, doing more than 150 miles an hour, which was a record at the time. So motorcycles have some unique challenges for electric vehicles. They have a very small form factor. You can't put too much inside of them. The ergonomics are important, how the rider sits on the bike, how the rider moves around on the bike. And dynamics are very important. If you've ever seen motorcycle racing, you've seen people hanging off of the bikes, dragging their knees. The physics behind it are kind of mind-boggling, actually. And on the other hand, batteries are very heavy, and it requires a lot of them to propel a vehicle down the road at speed. So this was a real engineering challenge. We had to innovate in technology, in packaging, and in the digital management of the technology to get more from less. Fortunately, Mission had some great engineers, and it was a very self-selecting crowd. There were easier jobs with more established technologies and more resources at your disposal, but we were all at Mission because we wanted to be. Whether it was for the engineering challenge, the love of speed, the environmental impact, the drive to be on the cutting edge, everyone had their reason to be there, and we were all sort of kindred spirits. So I was hired in as the marketing director at a company full of engineers, and when I arrived, the company was kind of at a crossroads. The Mission 1 was impressive, but it was really a rough prototype. And the attempts to sell it were challenging given the recession that was going on at the time. So we sat down as a company and we discussed it, and we realized that we'd created this amazing technology and that we should try selling it to major vehicle manufacturers, to automotive companies, to other motorcycle companies, even to heavy equipment manufacturers. The idea being that by being a supplier, we could get our technology out there and doing more good in the world than we ever could just selling a modest number of motorcycles. So we basically pivoted the business and became a supplier of electric vehicle technology. And when we did this, a lot of things happened. We started getting some contracts, we got a fresh round of investments, and the company grew. But it's still very difficult. Selling to big companies when you're a small one is not easy. We had the technology, but we didn't know exactly how to prove that it could do what it said on the tin. But fortunately, there was a second bike on the drawing board, one that had iterated on the last design, and one where we had consulted with the best chassis designer in the world and one of the most respected motorcycle stylists. And we took everything that we had learned about the technology in the first bike and we made it better. So in spite of the company's pivot to a supplier and with no small amount of internal debate, the decision was taken to build a new technology demonstrator. And we named it the Mission R. It did 163 miles an hour in one gear. It would go 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds, and it would go over 100 miles on one battery charge. So we unveiled the bike in December of 2010 at the Los Angeles Motorcycle Show, and it's hard to explain just how much that machine means to me personally. Not just because I have my own blood, sweat, and tears in it, but because it really is the representation, the physical embodiment of that Venn diagram I was talking about earlier. It speaks to me as a motorcyclist, as an innovator, and as a concerned citizen of the world. However, it still had a lot to prove to other people, so we took it racing. So MotoGP is sort of like Formula One for motorcycles. It's the pinnacle of motorcycle racing. It's a church of gasoline and rubber. And when they showed up at Laguna Seca Raceway in California in 2011, electric motorcycles were actually on the undercard. Now, a lot of people weren't happy about this. They think it should be a gasoline-only affair. They called us kitchen appliances and talked about putting cards in the spokes. They kind of thought we were a science fair or a circus sideshow. But then we went out in qualifying, and we lapped Laguna Seca in 1 minute and 31 seconds, just 10 seconds off the pace of the fastest MotoGP bike. And we won the electric bike race by more than 40 seconds. And people started taking notice. Next, we got that bike in the hands of everyone we could: journalists, major automotive manufacturers, investors, showing them and not telling them why this technology was good and what it was capable of. Even the most rational engineers had a visceral reaction to riding the machine. And with every appearance and every ride, the Missionar was really changing minds and starting a dialogue about the benefits of electric drive. So, Mission Motors continued to have its ups and downs, as any startup does, and we parted ways in 2012. I'm now working at Google X Labs, and it maps to a very different but equally important Venn diagram of passion, work, and values for me. It's a fascinating organization, pushes the boundaries of technology and innovation to achieve real moonshots, solving for 10x improvements instead of just incremental improvements. But I tell the story of Mission Motors and the experiences that led up to it because I think it best illustrates how passion and work aren't always enough to cut it. Because it's a paycheck at the end of the day, and there are difficult financial realities in working for a startup. I've told you about all the great outcomes that we had, but I haven't begun to tell you about all the work that went into it. It was stressful, it was exhausting, we were always behind the 8 ball, and these things are just givens when you're trying to do something like that. And yes, a downside of making your passion into your work is that it can no longer be your release from work. But when you inject your values into the mix, everything changes. Because suddenly you're not just doing something that you love, but you're doing something that you believe in. Thank you.